According to the most recent data, there are about 75,000 illegal immigrants living and working in Kansas. Although immigration is mostly a federal issue, it does affect states, especially as it relates to commerce. What is the best way for Kansas to deal with immigrants who live here already, and should a pathway to citizenship be part of the plan?
Okay, well, I think one of the things that we have put in place that's important is a DACA program. Where we are allowing the children of the folks who've come in here to the state undocumented to have an opportunity to grow and develop in our state, and I would keep that. We also provide the ability for those same children to attend our universities going at the full rack rate state tuition, and I think that's important. What we require of those kids is that they have spent 3 years in a Kansas high school, that they graduate from that high school, that they're eligible for entrance into our universities, and they must be on the path to citizenship. And I think it's important for Kansans. We need the workforce. We have got to keep folks like that here so that we can meet the needs that our businesses have. Now, there's no doubt that we need to do something about our immigration policy. We need to have the secure borders, but we also need to make sure that there's a path for citizenship. And when I'm governor, what I will do will be to work with our congressional delegation, because it is a federal issue. There's very little that we can do here to really change the laws in a way that will be meaningful. It's got to come from Congress. There's been deafening silence out of our administration this past 8 years on that particular issue. That silence will be over. I will work with them to ensure that they're standing up for the needs of Kansas businesses and Kansas citizens and finally give us a comprehensive immigration reform that works for Kansas.
We had this issue a lot in 2014 because it really is a federal issue, and at that time I said I believe our immigration policy needs to be tough, practical, and fair. And by tough I mean, of course we need secure borders, there's no question about that. But it also needs to be practical. We're not going to find and deport 11 million people nationwide, nor would that be humane, nor would it be economically advisable. Western Kansas would be decimated. 2 out of 3 dairies would close, 2 out of 3 feedlots would close. Every worker in a dairy farm is able to manage 80 heifers. And if you think about that, when they look at the economic activity of that, it's almost $1 million in economic activity for every dairy farmer. So how do we make it fair to taxpayers? I've said I believe that if you're here on an undocumented basis, you should register with ICE by a date certain. We've heard a lot of people say, yeah, but they've broken a law. Well, I've got an answer for that. You pay a small fine, perform community service as an acknowledgement that you've broken a law. But then if you obey our laws, pay your taxes, hold down a job, you should be able to stay here and work. If you want to apply for citizenship as well, I think you should be free to apply for citizenship as well. The things that a governor can do are limited. We can, however, insist on some uniform application of the U-Visa laws. So right now there's a law, U-Visa, that an immigrant can get if they are the victim of a crime and helping law enforcement solve that crime. In many instances, however, local law enforcement officials interpret that in very different ways. We need uniform standards for that. We need to make sure that we're not asking immigrants to pay their taxes twice. And in many cases, they file a tax return with an ITIN that doesn't match their numbers on their employment forms, and ultimately we're telling them to pay their taxes twice. So I think we can do things to make an environment that's a little bit more welcoming, recognizing how vitally important immigrants are to our state.
Rural Kansas continues to suffer from population declines. What specific programs would you propose to help those communities maintain what they have and grow?
We are in the process of finalizing our rural plan that we'll be releasing, but I think it boils down to a few things. Number one, we need to make sure rural communities are able to access the 21st century economy. And a big part about that is to make sure that they have the technology in the form of rural broadband to be able to do that. The second thing I'd like to do is see better pathways into vocational education. And in fact, and the reason for that is what we found is when a kid gets a vocational degree, they tend to get a job within 50 miles of where they got that degree. And so I think it's important that we create better pathways. What we found, however, is that for many certificate programs, there's very limited financial aid available. So if you want to go to KU, you can get a Pell Grant, a Hope Scholarship, a guaranteed student loan, but if you want to get a certificate in welding, you can't. And so I think we need to correct that issue. In addition to that, I think we need to give farmers the freedom to farm industrial hemp. And as part of our economic development plan, we've talked not only about pushing that forward, but creating a new financing mechanism for the processing capacity. Because the benefit of locating the processing capacity here is those are jobs you can't outsource. And so I think it's about growing the economy there and creating the opportunities for them to really participate in the 21st century economy.
Yeah, I think the Brownback policies of last 8 years have impacted our rural communities in a way even harsher than they have some of our other areas. Particularly, they need more than anybody for us to be funding our schools. They need more than anybody for us to be expanding Medicaid to protect their rural hospitals. They need more than anybody for us to fulfill our promises to build the roads that they need to move their goods. And they need us to invest in broadband so that they can enter the 21st century and move forward. So we will do all of those kinds of things within the Kelly administration. But I want to refer back to the Rural Prosperity Plan because we looked at some things there that are very specific to our rural communities. And I want to say that it was put together by people who actually know what they're talking about. My lieutenant governor running mate back there, Lynn Rogers, has 30 years of agricultural banking experience. He knows that area. He knows what to do. We also have a guy named David Tolan, who's now our campaign treasurer, who worked with Lynn and worked with Patty Clark, who was with the USDA for years and Department of Commerce before that, to put together this plan that is very doable, very detailed, and we will implement that. And it will involve all the things that I just talked about, but we'll also focus on some things very specific to the rural areas. Main Street. Remember when we used to have the Main Street program that really helped our rural communities? We'll reinstate the Arts Commission because that was a very important That meant more to our rural communities than anything else. I used to represent Eskridge, which is a little town in Wabaunsee County, and what they were trying to do was to establish, they had a lot of large buildings, vacant, perfect places for artists to go. And they needed that Arts Commission money to get that program started. Those are the kinds of things that a lot of smart people in our rural communities think about doing. We need to partner with them. We need to provide some technical assistance, and we will, in addition to just having a plan, will actually set up an Office of Rural Prosperity within the administration, and we will filter all policies, all budget issues through that lens so we know the kind of impact that it's going to have on our rural communities. And we'll also have in that office people who can work with our local communities so they can develop and build on their own assets. Well, we actually did pass that bill already, so it's in the works. We've got that going. I got to tell you, though, it took us 8 years to do it because everybody thought it was marijuana. And so it took a lot of educating my colleagues to finally get them to understand it's not. It really is just a potential new crop for the state of Kansas. So we've got that there. It's sort of in the research stage right now and will be developed. And I think that we will be adding that to the list of crops that we'll be able to grow here. And it's so good in so many ways. including the fact that it's less water dependent.
Mr. Orman, anything in particular about your advocacy that's maybe not in your current pending legislation?
Well, you know, again, the legislation that was passed was to allow for the researching of industrial hemp. The reason we limited it to that was in large part because that's what the federal government allowed for. I have a belief that the federal government is going to push forward quickly with allowing for the full growing of hemp, and so frankly, I think we need to make sure we have enabling legislation in place so that when that happens, we have the ability to jump on it right away. You know, this was a bill, the research bill was one that was strongly advocated for my lieutenant governor, who is also very much a rural Kansan. In fact, he's the only one living west of 81 on any ticket. As John would like to say, you know, he's the only guy in the race who can probably tell the difference between an Angus and a Holstein. I would count myself among that group as well. So, but no, I think we got to move past the research stage and make sure we have the enabling legislation in place so we can take advantage of any changes in federal law.